With rescue from Sudan no longer possible, the Israeli government focus on the remaining Jews trapped in Ethiopia. From 1985 until 1990, Israeli efforts to negotiate with the dictator of Ethiopia fail.
Ethiopia's dictator was Colonel Mengistu, known as the Butcher of Addis Ababa because he came to power in a military coup in 1977. In fact, it was rumoured that he had personally suffocated the former emperor, Haile Selassie, with a pillow. Now, this was the time of the Cold War, and for most of the 1980s, Mengistu was fighting a civil war with military aid from the Soviet Union. And in return, he's agreed to expel not only all US diplomats, but those of their allies, including Israel. By 1990, the Soviet Union is no longer in a position to give him military aid, so he turns to Israel as a way of building bridges with the United States. He offered Israel the chance to resume relations.
The Israeli Prime Minister seizes the opportunity. He turns to a trusted emissary and the former ambassador to Ethiopia.
I was on my way in a helicopter when the pilot told me that he had a message from Jerusalem saying that he should do a U-turn and go straight to Jerusalem. The Prime Minister wants to see you. And I was, as it were, whisked into the Prime Minister's office.
Mengistu sets his price. He wants weapons, but Uri is ordered to obey a US arms embargo on the Ethiopian regime. So the negotiations come down to money. The Jews become hostages.
So my question was, how much? He shot at me a figure, 180 million. I was absolutely stunned, but I said, "You're joking."
After months of hopeless negotiation, the government of Israel turn once more to David Alliance, by now an influential millionaire.
I offered to take the production of the textile for a whole year. I offered to put up a new factory there. I did everything. We tried very hard without success. So all the ministers. Then we were invited to go to see the president.
By now, Mengistu is losing the civil war. He has become desperate and paranoid.
I suddenly saw the guns is aiming at us through the curtain. President, give me an arm, you can have the Jews. And I said to him, Mr. President, we must accept that there aren't going to be any harm, but we can make your life easier financially. He didn't say no to it. We started talking and negotiating, and we got his agreement.
A personal payment to Mengistu is agreed, and he orders his government to set a lower price for the Jews. Uri can now finalize this payment. Talks progress until news arrives of a problem.
I get up one morning and I'm told by this Ethiopian who was my contact, "I'm sorry, Mr. Mengistu, he fled to Zimbabwe, taken all his group to Zimbabwe. So we have nobody to negotiate." That was for me a very unpleasant news.
When Mengistu fled, the country was in chaos. Meanwhile, Uri Labrani was still talking to what remained of the government in the hope of striking a deal. He finally made a take-it-or-leave-it offer.
Uri's closing offer is to pay the ministers what it would cost to transport each Ethiopian Jew to Israel. This is as high as he can go.
And still, the Ethiopian ministers hesitated. But with the rebels closing in and in need of money, they agreed to a price.
It was agreed to 35 million. A date was set. The conditions under which permission would be given were set down.
The mission is given the green light. Uri has to act quickly. The rebels are making their final approach on Addis Ababa. Uri has 5 days before they take the capital. On May 24th, 1991, the first plane lands. Fanta is one of those to make the trip. She was just 8 years old.
I grew up hearing about Jerusalem. I was told if we got there, all hardships would vanish because it was such a holy place.
הכל ייפתר. אני שומעת בחוץ מיקרופון, מגפון כזה.
Suddenly, I heard a megaphone announcing that everyone who has the right papers should go to the embassy. We rushed so quickly, I didn't even have time to put on my shoes. I actually came to Israel barefoot.
35 military and civilian aircraft are assembled. They have just 25 hours to airlift over 14,000 people. The operation works at a lightning speed. Aircraft barely have time to refuel before flying on. 28 planes are in the air at the same time. 400 buses escort the newly arrived refugees to specially built centres in Israel. Years of planning are coming together. Halfway through the day, the Ethiopians derail the mass airlift.
I get news that the control tower of Addis Ababa is beginning to make difficulties for our planes to land. So I asked them to find out what's happening.
The Ethiopian government are nervous and demand Uri pay before the operation can continue. With the rebels fast approaching, time is running out, but no one knows the Ethiopian bank number. The finance minister had fled. Uri and the remaining Jews are stuck. He needs a miracle.
I asked for the person who is going to replace this Minister of Finance person. It so happened that I knew him when I was ambassador. I said, look, you know me. Do you believe me that I, ambassador of Israel, would want to cheat you after a miserable $35 million? Take this phone your boss, the new prime minister, saying that you were satisfied that the money was ready in the account of Ethiopia. He phoned, the road opened up, and the last planes began to move out.
The planes are loaded with refugees. One is so full it has 1,088 people crammed on board. It remains a world record in aviation. The mission, dubbed Operation Solomon, is a success. Uri achieves what was unthinkable just a few years earlier. He rescues almost all of the Ethiopian Jews. Despite struggles integrating, the Ethiopian community maintain pride in their traditions. Central to them is their annual festival of Siged. It is a celebration that marks what they believe to be God's revelation to Moses. In Ethiopia, the community prayed to return to Jerusalem. Today they worship in the holy city itself.
Sigurd is a great festival. We want to celebrate that we are now in Jerusalem.
For Mahareta and her fellow refugees, reaching their promised land was no easy task.
And to do this amazing journey, to risk so much in order to make it possible, so it is a miracle.
The rescue of the Ethiopian Jews was one of the great humanitarian acts of the 20th century, and one that probably could only have been pulled off by the Israelis. After the Holocaust, most Israelis were determined never to leave Jews to their fate again, whatever the difficulties and however far they had to go. It was an extraordinary act.